The morning Willa Greer turned 22. She buried her mother in frozen ground and discovered the farmhouse no longer belonged to her. The creditor's man came before the grave dirt had settled. A thin fellow named Hutchinson, with ink-stained fingers and a voice like a door that needed oiling. He read the debt aloud on the porch while snow fell sideways off the Manitoba plains, and Willa stood in her mother's coat, the only good wool coat left on the property, and listened to the number, $460. Her father had borrowed it before he left, then her mother had borrowed more to cover the interest, then more again when the harvest failed 2 years running. The farmhouse, the quarter section of land, the horse that was already half lame, all of it forfeit. Willa asked if she could have a week. Hutchinson said she could have until Friday. Friday was 3 days away. She had $17 in a tobacco tin under the floorboard, 1 change of clothes, her mother's silver thimble, and no living relatives within 1,000 miles. She was not the kind of woman who cried easily. Her mother had raised her too practically for that. But she sat on the porch step that night with the cold biting through her coat and felt something close off inside her chest, like a window being latched. The notice at the post office in Darville was brief. A widower in the Peace River country, name of Parrish, was seeking a housekeeper willing to sign a 5-year work contract. Room and board provided. A reasonable wage, paid quarterly. The contract was legal and registered with the territorial office. Inquire within. Willa inquired within. The postmaster looked at her over his spectacles like he was trying to decide if she was serious. She was. She signed the contract 3 days later in an office that smelled of pine tar and kerosene, in a town she would never see again. A man from the territorial office witnessed it, stamped it, filed his copy. Willa got hers folded in her coat pocket. 5 years, room and board. She was not being sold, she told herself. She was making a choice. The difference mattered, even if nobody else could see it. The train north took 12 hours, then a wagon. Then another wagon driven by a man named Orrin, who chewed tobacco and offered exactly 3 words the entire 4-hour journey. Cold, far, and perish. He said the last one when the wagon crested a long ridge, and the valley opened below them, and Willa saw the Parrish homestead for the first time. She had expected something modest. What she found was something that had been substantial once, and was fighting very hard to stay that way. A 2-story timber house with a stone chimney, 3 outbuildings, a barn that looked solid, fences that had been repaired so many times in so many places that they looked like a patchwork quilt stretched across the snow. Everything about the property said once thriving and currently holding on by its teeth. Orrin stopped the wagon, said Parrish again and pointed, then drove off before she could ask him to wait. Willa stood in the yard with her bag at her feet, and the wind coming off the river valley hard enough to make her eyes water. The front door opened. 2 children appeared. A boy and a girl, she guessed 9, maybe 10, both blonde, both watching her with the particular expression of children who have learned that new arrivals usually leave again. The girl had her arms crossed. The boy had one hand braced on the doorframe like he might need to slam it shut in a hurry. Then a man filled the doorway behind them. Parrish was taller than she'd expected and quieter than anyone she'd ever met in the first 30 seconds of meeting them. Dark hair, a jaw that looked carved rather than grown, hands big enough to palm a fence post. He wore no hat despite the cold. He looked at Willa the way a man looks at a new piece of equipment he isn't sure is going to fit. "You're the Greer woman," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," she said. He nodded at the bag. "Bring that in." He went back inside. The children stared at her for another moment. The girl, Willa would learn her name was Blythe, said, very clearly, "You won't last the winter." Then they both disappeared inside too. Willa picked up her bag and followed, because there was nowhere else to go. The inside of the house was not quite as bad as she'd feared, and not quite as good as she'd hoped. The kitchen was functional but grim. A cast-iron stove that clearly worked, a table with 2 of its 4 chairs mismatched, a sink with a hand pump, shelves that held enough food for a few weeks if you were careful. The main room beyond had a good stone fireplace and furniture that had once been decent. Dust on every surface, laundry bundled in a corner, the windows wanted washing. Callum showed her a room off the kitchen. Small, with a narrow bed and a wooden chest and a hook on the wall. "Yours," he said. "Children are upstairs. I'm at the end of the hall. Contract says you manage the house and meals. I'll be outside most days. If you need something, ask Blythe. She knows where things are." He started to leave. "What are their names?" Willa asked. He stopped, turned halfway, like the question surprised him. "Blythe and Hewitt," he said. "They're 10. A pause. Don't let Hewitt climb on the roof. He's done it twice." Then he was gone. Willa stood in the middle of the kitchen and took a slow breath. The stove was warm, at least. That was something. She started with the dishes. There were a lot of them. Blythe and Hewitt came down for supper and sat at the table with the fixed expressions of children prepared to be disappointed. Willa had made what she could from what she'd found, A thick stew with salt pork and the last of what looked like stored turnips, biscuits from flour that was nearly empty strong tea. Not elegant. Honest. The children ate without speaking. Callum ate without speaking. Willa ate and did not try to fill the silence because some silences, she'd learned, were load-bearing. Finally, Hewitt said, "The biscuits are all right." Blythe kicked him under the table. "What?" he said. "They are." Callum looked at Willa across the table just for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite gratitude, more like relief, and then relief folding itself quickly back into blankness. He excused himself before she'd finished her tea. The days that followed were hard in the way of things that do not give you the dignity of a single large challenge, but instead grind you down through accumulated small ones. The stove ate wood faster than she'd anticipated. The pump froze on the third morning, and she had to learn from Hewitt, who found this hilarious, how to thaw it with a kettle. Blythe refused to tell her where anything was, initially, so Willa spent a full day opening every drawer and cupboard in the house until she knew the place better than anyone but the mice. Callum was outside from before dawn until after dark. She heard him come in, heard him move around the kitchen when she was already in her room. Once she got up at 5 in the morning to start the stove and found him at the table already, boots on, coffee made, staring at a ledger with the look of a man reading his own verdict. He closed it when he heard her. "Go back to bed," he said. "I'm up," she said. "There's no going back from up." Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile. Close enough that she noticed it, and then felt oddly warm, and then felt foolish for feeling oddly warm, and went to put the kettle on. 3 weeks in, Blythe told her she was wasting her time. They were in the kitchen, Willa repairing a tear in Hewitt's coat, Blythe supposedly doing her schoolwork but actually watching Willa, with that particular focused attention the girl used when she was trying to understand something. "The others all left," I said. "What others?" "The other women Pa hired." Blythe said it flatly, just stating facts. "There were 2 before you. First one left after 6 weeks. Second one lasted almost 4 months, but then Hewitt put a garter snake in her sewing basket and she was gone by morning." Willa kept her eyes on the needle. "Was the snake your idea?" A pause. "Maybe." "Did it work?" "Yes." "Then it was a good tactic," Willa said. "Poorly chosen target." She bit off the thread. "I grew up on a farm, Blythe. I've dealt with worse than garter snakes." Blythe was quiet for a long moment. "Why did you come here?" she finally asked. Willa handed her the repaired coat. "Same reason most people go anywhere. I didn't have anywhere else to be." "That's sad." "It's practical," Willa said. "There's a difference." Blythe took the coat. She didn't leave right away. That was progress, of a sort. But the real trouble started in January. Willa found the discrepancy by accident. She'd been looking for a candle in the storage room off the main barn. Callum kept his farm records in a wooden box on the shelf there, alongside seed catalogs and equipment receipts. And the box had been left open, papers half scattered, like someone had been through it in a hurry. She wasn't trying to read them. But numbers have a way of announcing themselves, and what announced itself to Willa was that the tallies for the fall cattle sale didn't match the tallies for the spring head count by a margin you couldn't explain away with one bad winter. She brought the box inside, sat at the kitchen table after the children were in bed, and went through the receipts with the same careful attention her mother had applied to their own failing farm books. An hour later, she set down the last paper. Someone was underreporting Callum's herd, selling cattle and recording less than the actual count. The discrepancy was clean, consistent, and had been going on for at least 18 months. Not a bookkeeping error. Too precise for that. Someone who handled the cattle sales knew what they were doing and was doing it deliberately. She found Callum in the barn before dawn. He was mending a halter by lamplight, fingers working automatically, and he looked up when she came in with the records box under her arm. "This is probably not my business," she said. "Then why are you here?" "Because I think it might become your business fast enough that you'll want to know." She set the box on the workbench and showed him. Walked him through the numbers the way her mother had taught her, not rushing, not assuming he'd see it, just laying one thing beside the next until the shape of it was plain. Callum went very still. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Donahue." "Who?" "My cattle agent in Grimshaw." His jaw worked. "He handles the sales, records the weights and counts, sends me the summary." "Has anyone else ever seen the full records?" "No." His voice went flat. "I trusted him. He worked for my father." Willa said nothing because there wasn't anything useful to say about that. "How much?" Callum asked. She told him. His hand closed around the edge of the workbench hard enough that the knuckles went white. "How did you find this?" he asked. Not accusatory, just the question of a man trying to understand what had happened and how it had stayed hidden so long. "The box was left open," she said. "I was looking for a candle." He looked at her for a long moment. In the lamplight, his face was all shadow and sharp line. "You could have said nothing," he said. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Willa thought about it honestly. Because this farm is what's keeping those children fed, she said. And I may only be here 5 years, but I'm here now. And right now this matters. Callum held her gaze for another beat. Then he nodded once, slow. I need to go to Grimshaw, he said. I know. I'll keep the books until you're back. That's not what He stopped, looked at the ledger in her hands, started again. Can you do that? Yes, Willa said. I can do that. He left the next morning. The children took his absence differently. Hewitt became louder, filling the space with noise the way a younger brother fills a space when the weight of the house falls on him, and he doesn't know what else to do. Blythe became very quiet and watchful, shadows under her eyes, checking the road out the kitchen window every hour. On the second day, Blythe came and sat across from Willa at the kitchen table without saying anything. Willa was going through the supply lists, cross-referencing what they had against what they'd need before the next town run. He'll come back, Willa said, not looking up. You don't know that. He went to deal with a problem, she said. He's not the kind of man who leaves a problem half-handled. Blythe looked down at the table. Our mother didn't come back. Willa set down her pen. What happened? She asked, carefully. The way you step onto ice you're not sure will hold. She got sick winter before last, Blythe said. Fever. Pa rode for the doctor, but the roads were bad. By the time he came back, she stopped, pressed her lips together. Hewitt doesn't talk about it. Pa doesn't talk about it. I talk about it sometimes, when I have to. That's the right amount, Willa said. Blythe looked up. Some things need to be said so they stop taking up so much room inside you, Willa said. But you don't have to say them every day. Blythe was quiet for a moment. Then, she used to keep the books too. The farm records. A pause. I used to watch her. Willa looked at the ledger spread on the table between them. Would you like to learn? The question seemed to catch Blythe off guard. She looked at the papers, the way you look at something you want very much and aren't sure you're allowed to want. Yes, she said. They worked together for the rest of the afternoon. Callum came back on the fourth day, grimmer than he'd left, with a bruise on his jaw she didn't ask about, and a signed statement from a justice of the peace in Grimshaw she didn't ask to read. He sat at the kitchen table and ate the dinner she put in front of him in silence. Then he looked at Blythe, who was correcting the weekly supply tally with a pencil stub, and her tongue caught between her teeth with concentration. What's she doing? He asked Willa quietly. Learning to keep the records, Willa said. Something crossed Callum's face, something large and carefully locked away. Did you get what you needed in Grimshaw? Willa asked. Enough. He rubbed his face. Donaghy's been doing it to 3 other farms, besides mine. The magistrate is involved now. There'll be a formal complaint to the NWMP. He looked at the bruise on his jaw, then seemed to realize she'd noticed it. Donaghy didn't take kindly to being confronted. And the missing money? Some of it can be recovered. His voice was steady, the kind of steady that costs something. Not all of it, but enough to carry us through spring. Willa nodded. I found 3 places in the supply chain where we can cut expenditure without losing anything you actually need. I can show you tomorrow. Callum looked at her across the table. You went through the supply records, too. I had 4 days and a working lamp, she said. What else would I do? He almost smiled again. It did the same thing to her chest as the last time, and she found it distinctly inconvenient. February came in hard and stayed that way. The cold that settled over the Peace River country that winter was the kind that made wood crack in the night and birds fall silent, and the livestock pressed together in the barn, for warmth that had nothing to do with the actual temperature. Willa wore 3 layers inside the house by mid-month. The children wore their coats to breakfast. But the house was warm enough. She'd learned how to bank the stoves correctly, learned which windows lost the most heat and stuffed the gaps with rags, learned that if you put a pot of water on the back burner all day, it kept the air from going dry enough to crack your lips. Small things, invisible things. The kind that only get noticed when they stop happening. Callum was in and out, managing what needed managing. He'd taken over the cattle records himself. There was no question of hiring another agent until the investigation was complete, which meant long evenings at the kitchen table, with papers spread around him, and the particular look of a man holding more than he should have to hold alone. Willa sometimes made tea without being asked, set it beside his elbow. He never commented on it, but he always drank it. One night she found him still at the table at midnight, staring at nothing. She'd come down for water. He didn't hear her at first. She almost went back to bed. She didn't. When did you last sleep properly? She asked. He looked up. I sleep fine. You look like a man who's had 2 good hours in 3 weeks. I'm managing. I know you're managing, she said. That's not the same thing as fine. He was quiet. The cattle, he said finally. The south fence. 2 of the breeding herd need checking. If we lose them before spring... He stopped himself. What happens if we lose them before spring? The pause was long enough to be an answer. The margins are that close? She asked. They've been that close for a year. Willa sat down across from him. Show me. It's past midnight. I'm awake, she said. Show me. He showed her. She spent the next hour learning everything about the financial state of Parrish Farm that Callum hadn't volunteered and that she hadn't been hired to know. By the end of it, she had 3 questions and 1 observation that made him put his pen down and look at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "How do you know about timber rights?" he said. "My mother's neighbor lost his farm over timber rights," she said. "I paid attention. You pay attention to everything." It wasn't a question. She wasn't sure it was entirely a compliment. But it wasn't a complaint either. "I find it useful. You should try it." He made a sound that might, in a different man, in warmer weather, have been a laugh. The morning everything got worse started with Hewitt coughing. It was the 3rd week of February, and Willa knew, the way you know certain things about children when you've been watching them closely for 2 months, that this cough was not the ordinary kind. It had weight to it. It had depth. By afternoon he was running a fever, and by evening he was not making sense when he talked. Blythe sat on the floor outside his room with her knees pulled to her chest and did not say anything. She didn't need to. Willa went to find Callum. He was in the barn. She didn't let herself stop on the way there, or think too carefully about what she was about to say, because sometimes the only way through is straightforward. "Hewitt's sick," she said. "It's in his chest. He needs a doctor." Callum was already moving before she finished the sentence. The doctor was in Saddle Creek, 3 hours east, in good conditions. The conditions were not good. A storm had been building all day, and by the time Callum had his horse saddled, the wind had picked up enough that the lantern in the barn swung hard on its hook. "I'll be back by morning," he said. "What if you're not? Then get Hewitt as warm as you can and keep him drinking fluids." He looked at her directly. "You know what to do." "I know what to do," she said. "Come back." He rode out. The night was the longest one Willa had spent since her mother died. She and Blythe traded off sitting with Hewitt, switching every 2 hours so neither of them got so tired they couldn't stay alert. Blythe was steadier than Willa expected. Steady and scared, and refusing to show the scared, which was the most Parrish thing Willa had seen from either child. She kept a cool cloth on Hewitt's forehead and talked to him in a low, even voice about nothing in particular. And Willa stood in the doorway watching and thought, "These children are going to be all right, whatever happens. They've got the kind of bones you can't break." Hewitt got worse around 2 in the morning. His fever spiked and his breathing went shallow, and Blythe looked up at Willa with her face very white and said nothing, because there wasn't anything to say. "He's fighting," Willa told her. "You keep talking to him." She went downstairs and made the hottest, strongest tea she knew how to make, and when she came back up, Hewitt had opened his eyes. "Is Pa back?" he asked. "Not yet," Willa said, "but he's coming. He always comes back." Hewitt's voice was rough, smaller than usual. "Even when the roads are bad, he always comes back." "I know," Willa said, and she found that she believed it. Callum came back at dawn with the doctor, a small no-nonsense woman named Dr. Price, who examined Hewitt in 4 minutes flat and issued 3 instructions in a tone that suggested she expected them followed. Pneumonia early enough to treat if they were diligent. Medicine, rest, fluids, someone watching him through the nights. Willa said she would handle the nights. Callum said he would too. They split them, 3 hours each. It was a strange kind of intimacy, trading shifts in the narrow corridor outside Hewitt's room, handing off a mug of tea and a brief accounting of the last 3 hours. He kept the medicine down. "Fever's a bit lower." He asked for water and drank most of it. Callum would nod and go in, and Willa would go downstairs and sleep on the settle by the stove for 3 hours and then come back. On the 4th night, Hewitt's fever broke properly. He looked up at Willa with clear eyes for the first time in a week and said, "You're still here." "Still here," she said. "Blythe said you'd leave when it got hard." A pause. "I told her you wouldn't." Willa smoothed his blanket. "Why did you think that?" "Because," Hewitt said with the particular certainty of a 10-year-old who has decided something, "you put water on to boil before you even knew he was sick. That morning, remember? You just did it. Like you were thinking ahead." He blinked, tired. "People who are going to leave don't think ahead." Willa sat with that for a moment. "Go to sleep," she said. "You need it." He went to sleep. Callum was in the corridor when she came out. She didn't know how long he'd been standing there. Long enough from his expression to have heard at least the last part. "He's clear," she said. "I think the worst is done." Callum nodded. He was looking at her in the way he had sometimes of looking at her. Like he was trying to work out where she'd come from and why the answer kept surprising him. "You've been here 12 weeks, he said. "About that. The first woman I hired was gone in 6. He paused. Blythe was the one who drove her off. Hewitt provided operational support. Despite everything, Willa felt her mouth twitch. He mentioned the snake. She was afraid of snakes. "I'm not." "No," Callum said. "You're not." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not afraid of much. I'm afraid of plenty," she said. "I just don't let it make decisions for me." He looked at her for another long moment. Then he said, "Go sleep. I've got the rest of the night." She went. She did not examine why the walk back downstairs felt different from every other walk she'd made in that house. Hewitt recovered slowly and thoroughly, in the way of stubborn children who refuse to stay sick once they've decided they're done with it. Within 2 weeks, he was back at the kitchen table, eating everything in reach and arguing with Blythe about her tallying methods, with a passion that suggested he was paying more attention to those lessons than Willa had realized. And then the problem with Donahue escalated. The NWMP investigation had moved faster than expected. Donahue had not taken this quietly. Word came from Grimshaw, through the postmaster, through a rancher who'd passed through the particular telegraph of small communities, that Donahue was claiming the discrepancies were the result of record-keeping errors on the farm side, that the farms involved had mismanaged their own counts, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding built on bad arithmetic. Callum came in from the yard with that news, and the same expression he'd worn, sitting at the table at midnight, staring at nothing. He's going to say the records were never properly kept, Callum said. He's going to say I can't prove anything because I never verified his reports. Can you prove it? Willa asked. A pause. Before you went through those files? No. And now? He looked at her. Now, he said slowly, I have a full accounting for the last 2 years, in a hand that isn't mine, with every discrepancy itemized and cross-referenced against the original receipts. And you didn't work for Donahue. You have no reason to fabricate anything. He stopped. Willa, you might be the only witness I've got who can actually speak to those numbers. Then I'll speak to them, she said. The magistrate in Peace River will want a statement. Maybe testimony if it goes to hearing, all right? Donahue's got money, Callum said carefully. His lawyer will try to discredit you. They'll ask where you came from, why you're here, why anyone should trust a woman hired under a work contract who... I know what they'll say, Willa said. He stopped. I know exactly what they'll say, she said again, and it doesn't change anything. You need someone who can speak to those numbers. I can speak to them. Let's not waste time on the part where you try to protect me from something I've already decided to do. Callum was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, my wife would have liked you. It was the first time he had said anything like that, about anything like that. Willa felt the words land differently than she expected. Not like a comparison, like an offering. Tell me about her, she said. She could see it. You don't have to, she added. No. He sat down, looked at the table for a moment. Her name was June. She grew up in the Qu'Appelle Valley. She came out here because I asked her to, and because she'd never let fear make her decisions for her either. A pause. She thought this valley was the most beautiful place she'd ever seen, even in February. She used to stand at that window, he nodded at the kitchen window, and say the cold made everything look honest. She was right, Willis said. She usually was. His voice went soft. I was in Saddle Creek when she died. Storm came in fast, same as always up here. I was 3 hours away. Hewitt was 7. Blythe held her hand. He stopped. She was 10 years old, and she held her mother's hand because there was nobody else. He looked at the table. I've been trying to make that right ever since. Not sure it can be made right. But I keep trying. The trying matters, Willa said. Does it? Yes. She said it plainly, because it was plain. Blythe knows you tried. Hewitt knows. That's why they're still fighting. Children don't fight for people who've stopped trying. Callum looked at her across the table. Why are you still here? He asked. Not unkindly. Genuinely. You found the problem with the records. You could have said nothing, and it never would have been your concern. You could have left when Hewitt got sick. I could have, she said. But this place is real, Callum. What you're building here is real, and I've spent enough of my life watching real things collapse because no one would hold them up. She met his eyes. I'm not going to be one of the people who lets that happen. Not here. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, thank you, and she said, don't thank me. Just don't let the south fence fall over again. I can see it from the kitchen window and it bothers me. That surprised a real sound out of him. Brief and low and genuine. She thought about it for the rest of the evening. The hearing in Peace River happened in late March when the thaw had started making the roads unpredictable, and the days were long enough to see by 6 o'clock. Willa rode with Callum in the wagon, 4 hours each way, with the account books in a satchel on the seat between them, and the kind of silence between two people who have said enough of the important things that the rest can wait. Donahue's lawyer was everything she'd expected. Expensive coat, condescending manner, the kind of voice that had never been wrong about anything in its life. He asked her where she'd come from, why she'd come here, how long she'd been on the property, what exactly her arrangement with Mr. Parrish was. He made the word arrangement do a great deal of work. Willa answered every question exactly as asked. Not more, not less. She walked the magistrate through the records the same way she'd walked Callum. One thing beside the next, no rushing, no assumptions, just the shape of the numbers laid plain. The magistrate was a sharp-faced woman named Justice Halloran, who had the air of someone who had heard every kind of nonsense and was no longer interested in new varieties. She asked 3 clarifying questions. She looked at the cross-referenced receipts for a long time. Then she set them down and looked at Donahue. The outcome was not immediate. These things never were. But by the time they rode back to Parrish Farm, the sun was setting in long orange sheets across the snow, and Callum said, "She believed you. She believed the numbers," Willa said. "I just read them out loud. That's not all you did." She didn't answer. Willa. He said her name differently from the way he had the first week. The first week it had been the name on the contract. Now it was just her name, how he called her. "When this is settled, when the money's recovered and the investigation is done, I want to change the contract." "Change it how?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the road ahead. 5 years isn't right, he said. "That's not," he stopped. "Tried again. You're not a hired hand. You haven't been a hired hand for 2 months. You run the books. You held my farm together while I was in Grimshaw. You stayed with my son through the worst night since June died." He stopped again. The muscle in his jaw worked. "I'm not good at this, I know," she said. "Keep going." He almost smiled. "I don't want to hold you to a contract. He stopped one more time. Then he just said it. "I want you to stay because you want to, not because you signed something." Willa looked at the road ahead, the snow catching the last light, the valley that was starting against all good sense to feel like somewhere she belonged. "What would that look like?" she asked. "Whatever you want it to look like." A pause. "I'm not asking you to be June. I'm not asking you to be anything except what you already are." But he cleared his throat. "The children need you. I need," he stopped. "The farm needs you." "The farm," she said. "Yes, not you." A longer pause. "Me too," he said, very quietly. If you Callum," she said. He stopped talking. "I came here because I had nowhere else to be," she said. "But I'm staying because I want to." "Those are different things. You said you needed someone who wasn't leaving." "Well, I'm not leaving." She looked at him. "That's not the contract talking. That's me." He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned back to the road and drove them home. The night they got back, Hewitt asked at dinner why Willa's face was different. "My face isn't different," Willa said. "It is," Blythe said, not looking up from her turnips. "You look like something got settled." Callum looked at his plate. His ears went slightly red. "Eat your dinner," he said. "We are eating our dinner," Blythe said. "We're also observing." Hewitt looked between Willa and his father, and then back at Willa with the expression of a 10-year-old who has put 2 and 2 together and gotten an answer that pleases him considerably. "Are you going to be here forever?" he asked. "Probably," Willa said. He nodded, satisfied as if this confirmed something he'd already decided. "Good. I told Blythe you'd stay." "You told me she'd stay too," Blythe said. "I told her you wouldn't leave," Hewitt said, "the first week. Remember?" "Yes," Willa said. "Were we right?" She looked at them both across the table. At the boy who'd told her she wasn't going to leave before she'd decided it herself. And the girl who'd told her she wouldn't last the winter, and then spent that winter teaching her where everything was kept. At the man at the head of the table who was looking at his coffee mug with complete concentration, ears still red. At the house around her that smelled like wood smoke and pine, and something she could only call used and good, the way a pair of working gloves is good. "Yes," she said. "You were right. They married in June, when the valley was at its best, and the wildflowers were coming up along the creek, and even February seemed like something that had happened to other people. The ceremony was small. The minister from Saddle Creek, a handful of neighbors from the nearest farms, the postmaster from Darville, who had, it turned out, known all along that this arrangement might become this, and had kept the thought quietly to himself. Blythe stood beside Willa and held the small bunch of fireweed someone had brought and looked, for the first time since Willa had known her, like a child instead of a small soldier. Hewitt was supposed to stand beside his father and spent most of the ceremony craning his neck to look at the horses tied at the fence, but he held still for the important parts. When it was done, Callum looked at Willa with the expression she'd learned to read over 6 months, the one that was trying to be contained and wasn't quite managing it, and said very quietly, so only she could hear, "You came here with nothing." "I came here with $17 and a thimble," she said. "And?" She looked around at the valley, the farm, the children, the man beside her who had needed someone to hold things together as badly as she'd needed somewhere to hold. "And everything after that," she said, "I earned." He took her hand. The children immediately and loudly debated, who had known first that this was going to happen. A debate that carried through dinner and well into the evening, and was still technically unresolved. The farm recovered, the way things do when you stop losing blood. The cattle were healthy that spring. The timber rights Willa had found buried in the old records turned out to be worth more than Callum had known, and that money went back into the fences and the barn roof, and 3 new head of breeding stock that Blythe named and Hewitt had opinions about. Willa kept the books. She also kept teaching Blythe, who had her mother's head for numbers and her father's refusal to accept an answer that didn't make sense, and who would someday, Willa knew, be better at this than either of them. She fixed the south fence herself one afternoon in September just because she could see it from the kitchen window and it bothered her, which made Callum laugh in the way she had decided was her favorite sound in the valley. It was not the life she had planned because she hadn't planned a life at all. Just a contract, just a winter, just survival strung one day to the next. But somewhere between the frozen pump and the sick child, and the numbers that didn't add up and the man who couldn't say the important things without running aground 3 times first, it had become something she hadn't expected. Real. Hers. Worth every difficult thing it had cost to find it.